Now that we've said that, what I would like to do is I'd like to go through a couple of sections and point out the films that we specifically think are worth talking about in the context of the awards race and of the Oscar race. And I think the absolute best place to start is with main competition, which is where we get the majority of our contenders, even if films like Killers of the Flower Moon, Mad Max Fury Road, they premiered outside of that.
Right.
I think in competition is where you're going to find the bulk of serious contenders. And I think there's no better place to start than the big winner, which was Fjord, right? The Romanian film. You saw it. We had to divide our efforts. I did not see it. I want you to maybe speak toward the film. To set up the stage a little bit here, Neon had this film going in, right? Neon had a bunch of films going in, and this was one of the ones that they had. It was actually ended up being the second Palme d'Or for the filmmaker, right? Who you like his work a lot.
Well, we adore Cristian Mungiu. His films, he's a master Romanian filmmaker. This is his second Palme d'Or, as you said. I was lucky enough to attend the premiere. I was in the room when Cristian Mungiu was there, and Renata was there, and Sebastian Stan was there. And I think very much you could feel in the room that, it's very much a Cristian Mungiu film. If you're familiar with his films, you're familiar with the tone and the sort of distancing aesthetic that he has. At the same time, he makes political works, and they're very focused on, a lot of dialogue and conversation, and thematically has this very masterful way of being able to explore these very thorny and intricate topics. So I felt it was very much a piece of the fabric of his cinema. That being said, I thought it was a spectacular film. I loved it. And I think a lot of people in the room felt that it was a very strong outing. And I was a little bit surprised that it was the Palme d'Or winner, but I'm not mad at it at all. I think it's among the top 3 films that I saw at Cannes this year. And just really quick for some context, Fjord is about a Romanian family that immigrates to Norway, and then the parents get accused of child abuse, and that opens a big can of very interesting thematic exploration that I'll get into in a minute. But interestingly enough, it's based on something that actually happened.
A lot of his work is.
As a lot of his work is. I didn't know that going into the film. I was able to talk to some of my colleagues while we were waiting to go into the film, and that's how I found out. And so in a way, there's this historical aspect, this modern historical aspect to most of Mungiu's work, which I think makes his cinema very fascinating. And this film, it's not what I pegged to be the Palme d'Or winner, but when you consider the themes it's exploring, very much talking about religious conservatism, and the tension between social liberalism, and it dabbles into topics of Christian nationalism. It also talks about the other. That's a big part of Mungiu's films. When a group or a person is sort of ostracized from the community because of their beliefs or because of their way of existing in the world. And again, it's very interesting cross section of these themes. These current political themes, especially with regard to religion and religious conservatism and religious Christian nationalism, etc. Right. I thought it was a very timely piece and very taut, and exceptionally well done. And so in that way, when you consider the themes of the film, I don't think it's that surprising that Park Chan-wook and his jury responded to so strongly to it.
Let's jump on that for a second, because I have specific questions for you, because again, you did see it, but you did mention something very important that I want to give context to before we go further, which is the jury. Okay, so the jury president is Park Chan-wook, right? Famously left off of last year's Cannes, went to Venice. His film, No Other Choice, did not land any Oscar nominations, although it was heavily campaigned by, again, another Neon film that did not make the final 5, right? But this jury also included Demi Moore, Ruth Negga, Stellan Skarsgård, Chloe Zhao, right? So an important thing about this whole mechanism, I think maybe you agree, is these juries are beefed up with not just prominent Oscar players, former nominees, but tastemakers, right? And so the election of the Palme d'Or by this jury is significant in terms of how a film is going to could potentially play more broadly, right, to an Academy base that, as you said, is growing more and more international. That's the first thing that I wanted to say about what you mentioned. So I think it is significant that you have Chloe Zhao and Park Chan-wook already championing this type of film, right? The other thing I want to say before we get into the specifics is just for a little bit of context, because I want it to be sort of in your mind as you sort of, comment on these questions that I have for you, is just Romanian cinema. Okay. As we all know, the way cinema works is usually in the grand scale of global cinema, at a time, there's one or two countries that dominate the conversation because of what's occurring at the moment. Romanian cinema, if you talk to me about it, the big name that comes up is actually not Christian. It's actually Radu Jude, right? Who's made a lot of really compelling, interesting films. A lot of them have been selected by Romania. But Christian is a cornerstone, right, of Romanian cinema, right? International cinema. And so he is very much like on that Mount Rushmore for people. His biggest breakthrough hit, of course, was 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, which was is I think now considered sort of a seminal film from back in 2007. It was one of the most critically acclaimed films of the year, to such a point where I remember in 2007, which was an absolute gift to cinema. We're talking about There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Diving Beyond the Butterfly. There were people stomping for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days being the best film of the year. And it, I think, even scored significant mentions at critics groups, for example, like National Society of Film Critics, right? And that's important to keep in context as to where Fjord could possibly angle in to a bigger nomination than just foreign film. When we talk about Romanian films, the last film to be nominated from Romania was Collective, the documentary, which we were both big fans of back in 2020. And Christian's previous film, Beyond the Hills, made the shortlist but did not get nominated. And I think pretty infamously, 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days did not even make the short list, even if it was an official selection. His film Graduation, I believe, was also selected. No, I'm wrong. Forgive me. Graduation did not get selected to represent Romania that year. Christian Mungiu, as you said, won his first Palme for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. He was also a director winner for Graduation and a screenplay winner for Beyond the Hills, which also won the Cannes Award for Actress, right? So with that in mind, do you think it can break into the bigger categories? What about performances like Renata and Sebastian Stan? Because a lot of people are looking at those big performances, and maybe you should, I think some viewers don't know, like, how big of a foreign film is this? Is it English speaking? Is it mostly in Romanian?
Well, first I'll say, with regard to the foreign language, the film is mostly in a foreign language. I don't think there's going to be an issue there of, whether the film speaks too much English. I mean, there are some sections where Sebastian Stan, I remember, speaks some English, with an accent, but it's the minority. Most of the film is in Norwegian and has some Romanian language as well. So I don't think that'll be an issue. I'll say at the top that this is not a vehicle for acting. It's not a vehicle that's going to get Sebastian Stan his second nomination in only, 2-3 years?
2024.
Right, and it's not going to be the nomination that Renata gets as her second after last year's Sentimental Value. I know the temptation is going to be between now and when people see the film more widely, that Renata is coming in for her win, Sebastian Stan is coming in for the win. This is not a film like that. If you see Christian Mungiu's films, the performances are always very strong, but they're a backseat to what's happening in the context of the story and the subtext of the story and even the plot of the story.
Are they both leads? May I ask? Yeah.
Yes, they are. But I would say that in my opinion, Renata stood out a little bit more to me than Sebastian Stan. But I would say that they're both co-leads, and they'll both definitely be campaigned as co-leads. But they won't factor into the acting races.
What about the ensemble? Maybe. I mean, remember Neon infamously did horrendously at the Screen Actors Guild Award. That's like one big mountain they have yet to conquer. What about sort of the ensemble prospect here? Because it is sort of about a family.
No, it's not. Again, it's the focus is in the background almost, for it to be. Well, I don't want to say it's in the background, but the focus isn't the ensemble and isn't the acting and isn't these two, up and coming, really revered actors. It's the story that's being told and how Christian Mungiu is telling the story. So I think that you can take it out of consideration, or not consideration, but you can take it out of an acting nomination. I don't think that's going to happen, or an ensemble. It's not like Sentimental Value, where there was a core four, and we spend so much intricate time with these four characters that they end up doing really well in the ensemble races, even if it doesn't even get nominated for the SAG. This isn't that kind of film at all. I would say this is the kind of film that might get snubbed completely at the SAG.
Right.
In much the same way that It Was Just an Accident did too.
And Sentimental Value, everything.
Anything that's
what I'm saying. So this is not going to be.
But I would say that there's an excessive. This film is very interesting because I want to say that something about this film that I find very fascinating is, and watching it, I think the tension of these forces really makes for compelling cinema. And I think is one very big reason that it won is that, when this family gets accused of child abuse, all of a sudden they become the ostracized figures in this Norwegian society, and the Child Protection Services of Norway and all the supporters of that branch and the community who supports what they stand for. In a way, as you're watching the film, you're seeing them being sort of the antagonists almost to this family. But at the same time, there are, Christian Mungiu's brilliance is how that is also being somewhat subverted, because some of the things that the family is being accused of, are things that are, relevant to explore and to consider. And so there's this interplay between these two forces that makes for very fascinating cinema. And at the very end, I found it to be quite devastating. The ultimate statement that's made in the Goliath versus David sort of interplay that's happening. I will say it's very subversive and it's very impactful.
I'm interested to,
but my point with that is that I can imagine a group of people watching this film that possibly whose political beliefs we don't align with personally, who might see this and might have a more superficial understanding of the story of religious freedoms being under attack. Mm-hmm. But if you're really seeing the film is really exploring. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond.
It's more dimensional.
It's much more dimensional. And like I said, there's a subversion that happens that I think is quite gut punching.
But you just point out something that I think is really interesting, right? Which is, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will occur as the season goes on, when the film finally lands in the U.S. and premieres and more people get to see it, which again, who knows how many people will see it, even with Renata and Sebastian Stan in it. There's already been some controversy, right, online and film Twitter, international viewers that were exposed to it at Cannes, about sort of the ideological conflict that's going on here, right? And that's going to be a little bit of a landmine to navigate.
I think it is, but I think it's it's one of the film's windows into being a film that's a talking point and that people discuss, and that keeps it in this sort of atmosphere of relevancy throughout the year, because you have those opposing views to what's being discussed. And so I find that very interesting, but I think it's a weapon that it can use to be a point of discussion throughout the year, and ultimately have that kind of point of discussion lead to a Best Picture nomination in the top 10.
Okay, so you definitely think it's a Best Picture.
I don't think it's a shoo-in at all. I think that, like Jafar Panahi's work, and It Was Just an Accident, that's a very specific type of masterful filmmaker. That's a very specific type of cinema that I think was not accessible enough to the voting body at large for it to get a Best Picture nomination. I think you have the same detrimental factors in this film, in the sense that it's a Christian Mungiu film through and through. If you respond to his cinema, you're going to love this film, or you're going to respond to it. If you are not accustomed to his cinema, like I don't believe many of the members in the Academy were to Jafar Panahi's, case in point, he had never been nominated. Christian Mungiu has never been nominated. If you are not exposed to his type of cinema, then I think you stand to be a little bit, distant from it and not necessarily super responsive to it.
Perfect.
So I think that it's not a shoo-in whatsoever, but there's, I think, enough there in terms of acclaim and in terms of what it's talking about that it can certainly make a play for Best Picture nomination. Yeah.
Let me specify my interrogation a little bit more to give our listeners a little bit more clarity. It's been about a decade more or less since we've seen a Palme d'Or winner not figure into the race at all. The one film that didn't really sort of show up was Titan, the Palme d'Or winner. Other than that, there have been breakthrough successes like Anatomy of a Fall. Nora was an English language speaking film. We already know how that ended. But even something like in 2017, The Square, for example,
Foreign language.
still made it into foreign language. So do you at least think
Absolutely.
that this will be at least the first time that Christian gets into
Absolutely.
an Oscar category?
Absolutely.
And Romania's probably second nomination into
Absolutely.
foreign
I
film.
absolutely do. But I think that if I were being honest, it's less to do with the film and it's more to do with the Palme d'Or win.
With the win. Interesting.
Yes.
And now,
And again, not knocking the film, he's a brilliant filmmaker, but I don't see him as the kind of filmmaker that they tend to embrace unless,
forced to.
Exactly.
Interesting. And then, so here's my other specific here is when we're talking about the recent success of Cannes, of Palme d'Or at the Oscars, let's divide the conversation. There are the secret agents who managed to get in an expanded field, right? And then there are the Honoras, the Anatomy of a Falls, the Zone of Interest, Sentimental Value. These are top 5 movies.
Mm-hmm.
Is Fjord a top 5 movie? Or is it an expanded Best Picture movie?
Right now, I would say my impression is that it's a film that gets in because of an expanded Best Picture list.
Right.
But like it was just an accident, was not a top 5 movie. I don't see Christian Mungiu's cinema in general as being something that would make a top 5 movie for them.
Okay. All right. I think that's fascinating. I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about this film for the rest of the season. Certainly one of the biggest titles that people are going to be looking at, possibly one that's being overestimated at this point based on what you're telling me. Seems like it's going to be a very worthwhile film to watch. Certainly sounds like the kind of film that would benefit from a sweep from a lot of critic awards, but there's still so much movies left to be seen.